Welcome to the Easton Grange, number 196. Today is July 17th, 2023. It's a warm and humid July day, but here we are assembled on the loggia of the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall and just enjoyed a wonderful fried chicken, potato salad, mac and cheese, salad, supper. And my name is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen. I'm a member here. You know me as the host of Community Forum, but tonight I'm just a member of the Grange, introducing my friend and colleague and lawyer extraordinaire, Dr. Kyla Bennett. She will be talking tonight about the toxins in our water and in household products and how to avoid them as best you can. So I want to welcome Dr. Bennett. Thank you for coming and being our guest once again on the monthly meeting of the Grange. So take it away.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Priscilla. I'll try to speak up because we're competing against the traffic here. So let me know if I'm not loud enough. If you can't hear me, I'm okay? Okay. Feel free, this is informal, I'm not doing slides because we're outside, so I'm just going to kind of talk with you. If you have questions, feel free to shout them out and I can answer them while I'm talking. I just have a couple of pages of notes. So the first thing I want to do is embarrass Priscilla. But I do this all the time. This is one of my pet peeves. The title of my talk is How to Avoid Toxics in Our Water and Household Products. And everybody, not just Priscilla, even my husband, who is also a PhD ecologist like I am, says toxin. Does anyone know what the difference is between a toxin and a toxic? No? Okay, I'll explain it to you. Similarly, it's like venomous and poisonous. People get that one all confused all the time too. That one's easy. If you bite something and you die, it's poisonous. If something bites you and you die, it's venomous. So that's the difference between poisonous and venomous. The difference between toxic and toxin is toxins are naturally produced by plants or animals. Toxic chemicals are ones that are human-made, and unfortunately, there are way too many of them in our lives right now. So now that we've got that behind us, we are going to be talking about toxics, not toxins, but if you want to talk about toxins, we can do that too, but we're going to be talking about toxic chemicals. And the major point that I want to get across is just because something is legal doesn't mean it's safe. So when you go to the store, whether it's Shaw's or Ace Hardware or Target or Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart, just because you can buy something off the shelf does not mean that it's safe for you. And the reason for that is kind of scary, and I'm going to explain why, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can try to minimize your exposure and your risk from these toxic chemicals. The first thing I want to talk about is who is supposed to be regulating this stuff. There are basically two different federal agencies that are supposed to be protecting human health and the environment. One of them is EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where I used to work for almost 10 years. The other one is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So the FDA has authority over all foods, all drugs, and personal care products like makeup and shampoo and conditioner and things like that. EPA doesn't deal with those. That's all FDA. EPA deals with everything else, pesticides, chemicals, all of those things. So those are the two primary agencies that are in charge. Both of them are failing Americans miserably. Let's talk a little bit about the FDA because our food is not safe. It is very much not safe. So 99% of food chemicals that have entered the marketplace since the year 2000, so basically over the past quarter of a century, were reviewed for safety by industry scientists, not by the government. In other words, what happens is the industry will say, hey, we've got this brand new food additive that's going to make things taste better or improve shelf life or make the bread rise higher or whatever it's supposed to do. Color it so it's pretty. And they provide the studies that they paid for to the FDA, and the FDA uses those studies. Now, science is supposed to be unbiased, and academic scientists, independent scientists usually are. But there are a number of scientists out there that you can pay to say what you want them to say. So industry scientists are doing these studies, industry is funding these scientists to do these studies, and they're saying this stuff is safe. And the FDA looks at it and says, oh, okay, it's safe, we'll approve it. That's a problem. So 99% of food chemicals are not independently verified as safe before they're put into our food. That's problem number one. And I'm going to give you two examples. There's a chemical called potassium bromate. And I bet if you read the ingredients on the rolls that you guys were eating, it will be in there. It's added into most baked goods, most breads and cakes and rolls and things like that. And it assists with rising. It makes things rise better. It's banned in the European Union. It's banned in Canada. It's banned in Brazil. It's banned in a whole host of countries. It has not been reviewed by FDA since 1973. And since that time, the international organization that looks at cancer risks, which is unbiased, has come out and said, guess what? Potassium bromate is a carcinogen. What has the FDA done about it? Nothing. So it's still there, still in our food supply. It's really interesting. If you go home to your favorite search engine, Google or Bing or whatever you use, and you Google the ingredient list of some common food like ketchup, Heinz ketchup. If you look at the label in the EU versus the US, ours is twice as long, because all of these chemicals have been banned in the EU and elsewhere, even China often. Think about that. China is not known for its food safety, but they have banned a lot of chemicals that we have not banned. So it's very, very different over here, very different. Our food supply is full of chemicals that can harm you. Another chemical that I wanted to talk about that the FDA has jurisdiction over that's doing nothing about is propylparaben, which is a preservative, but it's also an endocrine disruptor. And that is being used in all of our foods as a preservative, and it has not been reviewed by the FDA for almost half a century. The FDA is simply not, even when international organizations or other countries come out and say, this is a carcinogen, this is a problem, they still don't review it. You may have read recently, past week or so, that aspartame, that fake sweetener in diet soda, if any of you drink diet soda, don't. It's really, really bad for you. So aspartame is a carcinogen, and it was approved by the FDA in 1974. The last review was almost 10 years ago, but the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or IARC, just came out and said, oops, it's a carcinogen. It should not be in food. So what you have to do if you want to try to minimize your risk as far as food goes is eat as whole foods as you can. So don't eat processed foods, particularly highly processed foods. Eat fruits and vegetables. If you're not vegan or vegetarian, eat eggs, fish, whatever, but don't buy highly processed stuff. When you read the ingredient labels, you'll see some of these chemicals that I just spoke to you about that are known carcinogens are in there, and there's not a lot that we can do about it other than trying to protect ourselves and trying to minimize the risk yourself. So eating whole foods is your best way to try to avoid some of this. So that's the FDA. EPA is even a bigger problem. So EPA regulates pesticides and all sorts of chemicals. Under pesticides, there's a law called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. And they are supposed to be reviewing pesticides every 15 years. So in other words, if they've registered a pesticide, every 15 years they're supposed to say, okay, let's go and look and see if there's some additional information that's come out over these past 15 years. They don't. They continue in the US to use 85 pesticides that we use on our food crops that are banned elsewhere, including China. I mean, look at Roundup, which has been banned in most places. There are all sorts of dicamba, all sorts of paraquat, all sorts of pesticides, which not only harm you because of the residue that's on the food that you're eating, but when you think about the farm workers who are exposed to this and the fence line communities around these farms, it's really, really scary. A lot of these are carcinogens. Also, with these pesticides, the problem that we have is they kill things other than just the insects that they're trying to kill. When you create a chemical that is meant to kill, it's very hard to make it just kill that one thing you're trying to kill. So we get a lot of non-target impacts, which is one of the reasons we have such a problem with our pollinators these days. There's pollinator collapse in this country and around the world. Let me make this abundantly clear. Humans cannot survive without pollinators. We cannot survive without pollinators. There will not be enough food. What are scientists doing? Instead of saying, hey, let's take a look at these pesticides and see if maybe we should stop using some of them or use less of them or something like that, they're trying to build little robotic bees to do the pollination. I'm not going to comment on that, but it's wrong. Luckily, Langwater is organic. I know it's expensive, but I love it there. But there are also some cheap organic vegetables and fruits. You can go to Aldi, you can go to Trader Joe's, even Target and Walmart have very inexpensive organic produce. It's not only healthier for you because of the lack of pesticides, but it's healthier for the people who are working in those fields and growing those crops. And if you care about people other than yourself, it's really worthwhile to buy organic fruits and vegetables. One other thing I wanted to mention with pesticides is the Seresto collar. How many of you have dogs or cats? No one? Yes, I know you do. A lot of people. Don't use Seresto collars. They have killed hundreds of dogs, made thousands seriously ill with seizures. It's still on the market. EPA has been sued. Yeah.
What is this collar?
It's a flea collar. It's one of those flea collars called Seresto. Not only does it have PFAS in it, and I'm going to talk about PFAS in a little bit, but it actually kills the animals, and EPA refuses to take it off the market. Instead, they're putting warnings on the label that says, caution, your dog may die if you put this on them. But, you know, oftentimes it's too late. I have 2 dogs. We walk in the woods every single day. I use all natural herbal spray called Wondercide. There are alternatives. You just have to educate yourself, and you just have to keep reminding yourself that just because it's legal does not mean it's safe. Stay away from all of those flea collars. Seresto is the worst, but they're all bad. All of those liquids that you put in between your dog's shoulder blades there, awful, awful. Yeah.
Does the word natural mean anything on a food label?
No, it doesn't. And it's the only word that means something on a food label is organic, because there are federal laws and regulations about what can be called organic. For example, organic foods cannot use biosolids. Do you guys know what biosolids are? If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace, you can buy a bag of fertilizer and it says made with biosolids. Biosolids is what's left over from a wastewater treatment plant after the water is taken out. So it's human poop. It's human poop. They put this on crops all the time. This was EPA's brilliant idea. Let's spread it on food crops because it's a great fertilizer. Well, yeah, it's a good fertilizer, but unfortunately, all of the drugs that you take, caffeine, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, cocaine, Viagra, Ativan, chemotherapy drugs, they're all in there and they're going into our food. But not only that, again, there's PFAS, which I'm going to talk about later, in those biosolids. Organic farms are not allowed to use biosolids on their farms. It's more expensive. It saves farmers about 30% on fertilizers because these biosolids are free. Why are they free? Because wastewater treatment plants don't know what to do with them. So the MWRA gives that, I can't say that word, gives that crap away for people to spread on their home gardens, on their farms, on their golf courses to use it as fertilizer. It's human waste. It is not safe. So there's a lot of greenwashing going on, and a lot of people try to say, oh, this is natural. It's like the insecticide that the state uses to spray us. You know how here we are, ground zero here in Easton because of the Hockomock Swamp for EEE, Eastern Equine Encephalitis. And on the bad years, we get the planes flying over with the aerial spraying. And they're spraying a pesticide called Anvil 1010, which they say is natural. They say it's natural because it's the synthetic version of a chemical found in chrysanthemum flowers. But this synthetic version, there is nothing natural about it. And the other ingredient is a known human carcinogen. So people abuse the word natural. I wish that FDA and EPA would crack down on it. They should. They're not. But just be aware that there's a lot of greenwashing going on. What about the Safe Drinking Water Act? That's another federal law that's supposed to protect our drinking water. Those of you in Easton probably get those little cards in the mail all the time saying, we're violating the regulatory limits for PFAS in our wells. Luckily, our filtration plant is going online any day now. PFAS is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a mouthful, that's why we call them PFAS. It's a very large class of human-made chemicals. There are over 14,000 of them. They were discovered accidentally by scientists at DuPont in 1938. They were in a lab. Guy was making something. He spilled some on his shoe and then spilled water, and he saw the water bead up and didn't go into his shoe. He discovered a waterproofing agent. So PFAS have been used. That's what your Teflon nonstick pans are. They're all PFAS. It's a waterproofing agent, stain-proofing agent. It's used in firefighting foam. It is now in all Americans' blood. I just had my blood tested because in May of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And I am so careful about what I eat and what chemicals I use because I do this for a living and I know how dangerous it is to be alive in the year 2023 with all those chemicals out there. And they tested me for all sorts of genetic things. It was not genetic. The only thing that we can think of is that it was the PFAS because PFAS does appear to cause brain cancer. We don't know how long our water here has been contaminated. Kudos to the town of Easton, who I was the one who discovered that our water was contaminated because I tested it. I thought it would be clean and it wasn't. Probably because of our wastewater treatment plant, which we brilliantly put the effluent pipe about 1,000 feet from our most productive well. And in summertime, when it's drought conditions, that stream, Queesit, actually flows backwards and sucks the water from the effluent pipe right into the well. And PFAS are in so many consumer products, not just your pots and pans, but it's in your rain gear, it's in your stain-proof carpeting, it's in your couches upholstery if you've got stain-proof couches, it's in your guitar strings, it's on your baseball gloves, it's absolutely everywhere because it's a really handy chemical. And if you haven't watched the movie Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, I would highly urge you to watch it because that will tell you the whole story of PFAS. And so our well here, we actually are part of a very big class action lawsuit, and we just got offered a settlement, the town of Easton, along with the other 3,000 towns that we're in this class action suit with. 3M, one of the producers of PFAS, have offered over $10 billion. DuPont and Chemours offered like 1.2 billion. It's not enough because our filtration plant costs 9 million. Multiply that by the thousands, tens of thousands of communities in this country that are all contaminated. And EPA, even though EPA does a pretty poor job of protecting us, in March of this year, they came out and said, guess what? There is no safe level of two of these PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, which we have in our well. No safe level of it. It will give you cancer. Zero safe level, like lead. Zero. And it's in our water. So if you don't have a filter, well, our filtration system's going to come online soon. I've had a filter since we found out, but it's really worth getting one if the filtration plant is delayed at all.
Question.
Yeah.
I drink bottled water, but I shower with the regular water. Is showering
Where do you think your bottled water comes from?
Poland Springs?
You know what Poland Springs is? A lot of bottled water is tap water. It's just tap water. So you cannot escape it. I would challenge anybody to find me a water supply in the United States of America, probably in the world, that has 0 parts per trillion of PFOA or PFOS in it, the two big. So your bottled water has PFAS in it. There's no point in drinking bottled water. You should get a filtration system for your counter or your sink and drink our tap water that's been filtered. Much safer. But you bring up a good point, which is showering, because the 3 routes of exposure of PFAS are ingestion, drinking and eating it, dermal absorption from showers or clothing, or personal care products, and inhalation. You can inhale the dust. And in fact, firefighters, in 2019, 75% of on-duty firefighter deaths were from cancer. 75%. Why? There's PFAS in their turnout gear. It's been there since about 2006. We've been fighting to get it out. They don't want it in there. I have clients who have testicular cancer, brain cancer. They're firefighters, and every day they have to go to work and put that uniform back on, and they know that's what's giving them the cancer. It's heartbreaking. Yeah.
What about the water that we can get at the water department that we fill into the bottles? Is that safe?
That's safe. That's why it's there.
Okay.
Yes, you can get the water, but be careful what container you use, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But yes, the water that the town offers us at the water department on Bay Road is PFAS free. Again, our big filtration system is supposed to come online in July. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to happen. It may slip till August. Once that happens, you can just use your tap water and you'll be fine, because that filtration system was designed to remove the PFAS from it. But it's not online yet. Yeah.
Is there any residual in our piping, the conduit to bring our water?
That's a really good question. PFAS is really super sticky. So one of the places that PFAS contamination came from is the AFFF firefighting foam, which is fluorinated. That's got PFAS in it. They're now banning it and making fluorine-free firefighting foam. But there was a a fire station out in San Francisco that wanted to reuse their trucks that they used to use this AFFF foam in, and they power washed it 11 times and they were still getting residual PFAS out. So that's a really good question, and I don't know. I'm not giving up my filter at my sink. It'll be much better once our filtration system comes on. We can't possibly replace all of our pipes. And the problem with PFAS is that it's really, really persistent. The nickname of it is forever chemical because it doesn't break down. It takes decades, if not hundreds of years, to break down. So when I had my blood tested I just had it tested in June. So 3 years after my surgery, my brain tumor surgery, I still, even though I am super careful, I still had 830 parts per trillion of PFOA in my blood. And I am one of the lowest in all of the country. My blood levels of PFAS are some of the lowest in the country because I am very conscious. So I can't even imagine what you guys have in your blood, but it's not good. So I highly urge you to get a water filtration system. And I can tell you afterwards where to look for these. Get the right kind of filter.
What about these filters we use on refrigerators? They say they filter that stuff.
Some of them do and some of them don't. So I'll tell you now, there's NSF has a list of certified filters to remove PFOA and other PFAS. If you get one of those filters, those are the best you can get. Some of them are refrigerator filters, but you need to get one that's independently tested. Why? Because of greenwashing, right? So all of these companies, in fact, one of the biggest water filter manufacturers these days, guess who it is? 3M. The very company who made all these PFAS are now they're making money by making filters to remove the contamination that they caused. So NSF has this great list of filters. I can show you on my phone afterwards, but they do have some refrigerator filters. But I got an A.O. Smith filtration system from Lowe's. It was $129. Put it under my sink, and I make ice with it. I give it to my dogs. I make coffee with it. Anytime we cook with something that's going to absorb water, like rice or pasta, we use it. If it's hard-boiled eggs, we don't. But you need to use it for everything. And you can use the filtered water at the water station.
What about washing the vegetables and fruits?
I use filtered water to wash my fruits and vegetables. But if you're not eating organic fruits and vegetables, it doesn't matter because you're getting it anyway from the biosolids that are used to grow the fruits and vegetables that are conventionally grown.
The water that I'm watering my garden with my
So there,
vegetables,
yes.
supposed to be organic or
Correct. So, but it's, so like, I've been eating Langwater's vegetables ever since they came here. We have a CSA, we have a half share. I eat them, I grow my own vegetables. We got filters for our hoses at home. Again, once our filtration system comes online, and Easton has been so good. Connor Reed and the select board have been just phenomenal. And the DPW and water department, they were all wonderful. They were the first in line at DEP. And they said, we've got a problem, we have PFAS, what do we do? And DEP gave us money to help design our filtration system. They gave us a grant. They were wonderful. So yes, your hose, but you can buy hose filters too. I have them. That's what I use for my garden because I grow a lot of my own vegetables too.
What about rainwater?
Rainwater has PFAS in it too. It's everywhere.
What about the condensation, like from the air conditioner? I catch that. Is that pretty good to?
No.
Okay,
No. This chemical is, the reason PFAS are so dangerous is because of how persistent they are. They've got this backbone of carbon-fluorine atoms that are bonded together, and that carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest bonds known to humans. It just can't be broken, to the point where EPA actually gave an award. It was like a reward, like a bounty. They were like, anybody who can figure out how to destroy this stuff, which we regularly approve to be put on the market, we'll give you $50,000. And so far, we can do it at the lab. We can, if you're in a lab with small amounts, you can destroy it using a lot of energy and a lot of heat. but we can't scale it up because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in, I tested lobster from Massachusetts. Don't eat the tamale. If you guys eat, whatever you do, don't eat the tamale. But even the flesh, really, really high levels. 6,000 parts per trillion. And remember, there's no safe level of this. So if you eat one lobster tail a year, that's enough to make you sick. So back to the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Safe Drinking Water Act only regulates 90 contaminants. 90. The agency, the EPA, has not issued new regulations for a chemical in drinking water since 1996, until they just proposed standards for 6 PFAS, PFOA, PFOS, and 4 other ones. Those hopefully will become law by the end of this summer. And the levels that they are suggesting for PFOA and PFOS are 4 parts per trillion each. They say, remember, there's no safe level of this stuff, but they know that there's no way we're going to be able to get the levels down so low, like below 4, and test for it well. So they're making the levels at 4. And remember what I just said about the lobster? 6,000 parts per trillion, right? And they're saying there's no safe level. The drinking water limits are going to be 4 parts per trillion. That is such a tiny amount. And one of the things that industry said, again, talking about greenwashing, industry says it's such a minute amount. Yeah, but it's so poisonous that even that minute amount can give you cancer. The other bad thing about PFAS is that it gives you more severe COVID, and it makes vaccines not work. It's not just a carcinogen. It has also thyroid problems, developmental problems, problems with pregnancy, problems with, it raises your cholesterol, all sorts of issues with this huge class of chemicals. There are over 14,000 of them, and we can only test for 70. Why can we only test for 70? Partially because these companies that make them claim the chemical formula as confidential business information, so no one's allowed to know what they are. In fact, Solvay, one of the companies that makes PFAS, actually sued a lab in Canada because a lab in Canada did some forensics on some water and figured out which PFAS was in there, and they got sued because it was confidential business information. So we can't regulate what we don't know is in there. It's really frightening. Another example about how the Safe Drinking Water Act and EPA is failing us is perchlorate. You may have heard about perchlorate. It's in fireworks. It's in, Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod. They have a huge perchlorate problem down there in their sole source aquifer because of the Army base. And when they sent the Army bombs to practice with, they would send them with 7 of these pouches of fuel to make the bombs go. And the Army quickly realized that if they used all 7, these bombs were going to end up in the middle of Route 6, which is really not good for tourism, right? So they said, okay, we only need 3 of these bags so we can keep it within the confines of our Air Force Base. And so they called the Army and they said, the Department of Defense, and said, hey, can we just have 3 bags instead of 7? And they were like, nope, comes with 7. So what they did is they stockpiled all these extra bags and they lit them on fire, and it contaminated the entire sole source aquifer. So perchlorate is one of the chemicals that has contaminated Cape Cod's aquifer. In 1998, EPA put it on their list of contaminants of concern to look at. Fast forward to 2022, EPA said, nah, we're not going to regulate it. And it's still not regulated. So again, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. I talked a little bit about the biosolids. MWRA's biosolids have about 15 to 18,000 parts per trillion of these chemicals, of which there is 0 safe in them. And our farms are using them. Our farms are using them. So if that's not an argument to start eating organic, I don't know what is. Again, I know it's expensive, but Aldi, Target, Walmart, Trader Joe's, they all have pretty cheap organic fruits and vegetables. It really is worth it. In Maine, farmers have had to abandon their farms because they used biosolids as fertilizer back in the 90s. And the cow's milk is so contaminated, it will kill people. So they've shut down farms. I have one guy that I talked to up in Maine, this guy Adam. He had to actually leave his farm. He and his family had to move and leave his farm behind because they were afraid that the kids were breathing in the soil, which was contaminated with PFAS. I have a case in Texas where a farmer, he raised catfish. All of his catfish died when the farm across the street used biosolids. There's a really nice documentary, it's only 45 minutes, by Vice. Vice News just put out a documentary about PFAS and biosolids. It's worth watching if you're interested in that a little bit more. So now we're going to get to the meat of it, which is EPA's regulation of chemicals, toxic chemicals. There's an act called, the acronym is TSCA, T-S-C-A. It stands for the Toxic Substances Control Act. TSCA was enacted in 1976. At the time TSCA was enacted, and remember, EPA only came into being in 1970. Okay, so all of us, well, not all of us, there's some young people here, but most of us here were alive in 1970. Before that, it was a free-for-all. It's like, you've got barrels of chemicals, bury it in your backyard, dump it in the nearest river, put it in the ocean. There were no regulations. So EPA came into being under President Nixon. He was probably the best environmental president we've ever had, believe it or not. And once TSCA came into being, it mandated that EPA do risk assessments on some of these chemicals to see if they were safe or not. Unfortunately, by 1976, there were already 62,000 chemicals in commerce. So what EPA did, because they thought, oh my God, there's no way we're going to be able to do risk assessments on these 62,000 chemicals, so we're just going to grandfather them in and pretend they're all safe. So 62,000 chemicals that are on the market have never been looked at as far as their toxicity. 62,000. How many are there right now? 86,000. So the vast majority of chemicals that are on the market have never been assessed for their toxicity to the environment or human beings. That alone, to me, is one of the scariest things I've ever heard, but it's true. Luckily, in 2016, there was an act called the Lautenberg Amendment, which amended TSCA. And what it did was say, okay, we've got to start looking at these old chemicals, okay? And it mandated that the existing chemicals, that we look at 20 a year. Well, okay, let's divide 20 into 62,000. Well, we're all going to be long dead by the time they get through that list, but at least they're trying. Okay, by the way, they're not doing 20 a year. They're doing like 2 a year. But besides that, 2016, what happened in 2016, Trump won, and it didn't really get implemented when he was. So now they're trying to do it under the Biden administration. The old TSCA used to have a cost-benefit safety standard, which allowed things like asbestos. We're the only country in the world that still has asbestos on the market. Everybody else has banned it. We know it causes cancer, right? Everybody probably knows somebody who's died of lung cancer from asbestos. We know it's bad. It's still on the market here. It's still being used because EPA can't bring itself to ban it. But this new TSCA, the Lautenberg Amendments, is supposed to be making things better. Unfortunately, it's not. Why? Biden's EPA isn't so good either. EPA hasn't been good for a long, long time. In 2020, I was contacted. I work for a company called PEER, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. We're a whistleblower group for local, state, and federal employees who work in the environmental arena. I was contacted by 5 EPA chemists who worked in the new chemicals division. Their job was to do these risk assessments on these new chemicals, not the existing chemicals, not the backlog of 62,000, but brand new chemicals that industry wants to put on the market. And they told me that the corruption and malfeasance at EPA was such that all of these chemicals were just getting rubber stamped and put on the market. It wasn't Trump. It's still happening. It happened under Obama. It happened under Bush. It happened under Clinton. It's happening under Biden. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Industry has captured EPA. And it's really, really disheartening. Here's an example. There's this thing called biofuels, and it sounds okay, right? It sounds like biofuels. Oh, is that like corn? Or, I mean, what is biofuels? Well, it's greenwashing. Biofuels, in this particular instance, are plastic that are being burned for fuel. EPA just issued an approval for these biofuels. The cancer risk for the people who live next to these factories, which are usually people of color, low income, these fence-line communities, really unfortunate. 1 in 3 people will get cancer. And EPA said, that's an acceptable risk. Let's approve that. 1 in 3 people. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. If you want to read an article about the biofuels, Sharon Lerner, the reporter, did a really nice article in ProPublica, and she's doing a follow-up article, which should be interesting. One of the other problems with the EPA New Chemicals Division is they have 90 days to do a risk assessment on these new chemicals. A new chemical comes in the door, the clock starts ticking. Sometimes the only thing these clients are given is the name of the chemical and an abstract of an industry-sponsored paper. They're not allowed to order new testing. Well, they are under the law, but EPA doesn't let them do it. So they have to try to figure out whether this new chemical is toxic or not, whether it's going to harm the environment, whether it's going to give people cancer or developmental issues or whatever it might be. They have 90 days to figure this out. How do they do it? They look for what we call analogs. They look for structurally similar chemicals and see if there's any information on those chemicals. But again, EPA is so captured by industry, they are unable to do the right thing. So there's a huge series, 10-part series on my clients in The Intercept, which is an online publication by Sharon Lerner. If you want to really get scared, read that. I mean, to the point where we had audio recordings in those that my clients taped, well, contractors taped it, and my clients got copies of these tapes, where these managers at EPA are saying, can we, and I'm not exaggerating here, can we have an override button that we can just press to override the scientist's opinion and get something out? That's what they do. That's what they do. There's also a revolving door between management, between industry and EPA. We have one guy at EPA who has been back and forth between EPA and industry 4 times. He comes to EPA, lets a chemical go, then he goes and works in that industry for a year or 2, comes back, works in something else, goes back and forth. Some of them own stock in these companies that they're regulating. There are so many ethics violations. It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. The Inspector General at EPA has done a 3-year investigation into my clients' cases, and those reports should be coming out this fall. I can't wait to see them, and hopefully there will be some changes made at EPA, but it's not going to be in time to save most of us because these chemicals, as I said, are already on the market. So we talked a little bit about PFAS already. I have it on my notes here, but want to tell you a little bit about where they're coming from. Sometimes they're used as active ingredients. They're put in purpose. You want me to speed it up? So sometimes it's contamination. And that's what I want to talk to you about the plastic, because you said, when I said be careful about what containers you use. Back in 2019, when I realized that Easton's water was contaminated, I was trying to figure out why. And I was looking at a map of all of the towns in Massachusetts that had PFAS contaminated water. And I realized there was a cluster of them in the southeastern Massachusetts. And I thought, why is that? What do we have down here that nobody else has? And the only thing I could think of was that we get sprayed by those pesticides in the plains every year. So I asked DEP if it's possible there was PFAS in the pesticide. They said, no way. And I said, okay, I don't believe you, I'm gonna test it. And I tested it. And guess what? There was PFAS in the pesticide. And so that got EPA's attention because it's not supposed to be in there. And EPA did a bunch of testing and they determined that it was contamination from the plastic containers. Because you know those little recycling numbers on most plastics? Like this one is a 1. This is safe. The number 2, which is something that we can recycle, the HDPE, the high density polyethylene. Many, many, many HDPE containers are fluorinated, which improves the barrier properties. So it prevents smelly things or caustic chemicals or even things with a lot of flavor from leaching out. It puts a barrier. So what this one company called Enhance does is they get shipped these empty containers, they put them in a chamber, suck out the oxygen, blast it with fluorine gas, and unintentionally they create PFAS in the parts per billion. Remember, it's toxic in very low parts per trillion. They create it in parts per billion, orders of magnitude higher than what's toxic. And that PFAS will leach out into the contents. It'll leach out into water, it'll leach out into your food, it'll leach out into your ketchup, your mayonnaise, your shampoo, your conditioner, your household cleaners, your fuel, all of that. So we decided to sue Enhance. And when you sue a company when EPA has jurisdiction, what you have to do is you have to give a notice of intent to sue. You have to tell EPA, you have to say, in 60 days, we're gonna sue this company because you, EPA, are not doing your job. So we did that. And we waited and waited and waited. And a week before the 60 days came up, what does EPA do? They filed suit against the company. We still sued, and now we're in court with EPA and against Enhance, but it looks like EPA is trying to make this go away. They fluorinate 200 million plastic containers a year, and worse, because HDPE, the number 2, is something that we recycle, it's contaminated our entire recycling stream. What do they use this recycled plastic for? Irrigation pipes for our food. This is why we're so contaminated. Okay, so what you need to do to protect yourself is be educated, number 1. Number 2, don't buy into the greenwashing. I have friends who will contact a company and say, hey, does your pan or does this piece of clothing, does this have PFAS in it? And they'll say, we're PFOA free. And they write me back and they say, look, Kyla, it's PFOA free, I can buy it, right? And I say, no, because PFOA is one of 14,000 PFAS chemicals. You need to get them to say there are no PFAS chemicals in this product, not just PFOA. So they will greenwash until the cows come home because that's how they sell their products. So you have to be an educated consumer. There's actually a website that has PFAS-free products that you can buy, pots and pans. I only use stainless steel or cast iron. All those nonstick pans are awful. You can buy rain gear that's PFAS-free. You can buy almost anything that's PFAS-free except for turnout gear if you're a firefighter, but that's coming. But because it's in so many plastics and it's contaminating so much, it's really, really hard to avoid. So what I try to do is avoid plastic altogether, which is hard, but that's a good thing for the environment too, because as we know, we have a huge plastic problem in this country, in the world. Huge plastic problem. And plastic is fossil fuels.
Plastic like sandwich bags and saran wrap.
So
all that stuff.
the Ziploc bags, that brand does not have PFAS. A lot of the wax paper or parchment paper does. There's a brand called If You Care that does not.
Really?
Yeah, so again, you just have to be an educated consumer. You have to ask a lot of questions. Should the burden be on you? Absolutely not. But because EPA and FDA are broken, it's the only thing we can do is you need to read labels, you need to ask questions, and you need to educate yourselves. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Kyla, you are a rocket star. I mean, she's amazing, isn't she? And And so for those viewers out at home who are watching this, you know, I hope that you've had pen and paper and you're taking notes, because the information that you have given us, Kyla, today is so extensive and so important and critical. Now, a couple years ago, when on Facebook you told all your Facebook friends, and I'm one of them, that to go to Lowe's and get an A-O Smith 2-filter water filter to put under my sink. So I have done that. And I use that water to drink, and so everything.
For your dog too.
Yes, and you have to change the filters, the 2 filters, every 8 months. So August is my change month, and when they come out, those filters, they're not clean.
They're hazardous waste. You have to bring them to hazardous waste day. You can't just throw them in the garbage. That's how bad it is.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Okay, and before we go, what was that, Bill?
I was just commenting that my mother was to be 99, so it must be a genetic component.
Some people are lucky, but she may have eaten cleanly, who knows? And, also, if she was 99, a lot of these chemicals were not on the market when her formative years.
That's true.
Okay, and so here's a news flash for all of us here tonight and all of you who are watching. Big news flash. Are we listening? Yes. Okay. We have a TV star, documentary star here in our midst. It's not me. It's Dr. Kyla Bennett. And she is going to, they're doing a documentary on her, all the work that she has done. Do you know how wonderful it is to have you here in our town?
Not everybody would agree with you, Priscilla.
No, but most of us do. And you are a treasure, and you've been fighting for many, many years. So here she gets a PhD in biology, and then she couples it with a law degree, and she's fighting for us and for a clean environment. So Bloomberg News is bankrolling a documentary starring Dr. Kyla Bennett. And it's going to be, is it how long? Is it going to be an hour? Or?
I have no idea. They're doing an article first, which is coming out end of this month. And the reporter flew out here from California, and we took her to the Hockomock. She took all sorts of pictures. She interviewed a former select board member. Yeah, so then the film crew is coming out soon.
Great. Okay, so you're putting Easton on the map. And for those of you who remember, many years ago, when at town meeting, artificial turf was on the ballot, and Kyla got up and she defeated it, and then they asked to have it reconsidered because this guy got up who would raise a lot of money, right? And he had a vested interest in getting that artificial turf on the ground. What does artificial turf have? PFAS, all kinds of them, and interestingly enough, the goalies, the soccer goalies, have the highest incidence of cancer. Why? Because they roll in it in order to capture the ball, right? They're rolling in it. So think about all the kids who are going to be rolling in it, whether they're playing baseball, softball, field hockey, soccer, whatever, football. And so it got reconsidered and it passed. And it was one of the biggest disappointments for Kyla and me. I got up and spoke too. But this time,
won.
But we just won. Now, a few weeks ago, we had our town meeting, and you want to talk about it?
They wanted to put at the new school, they wanted to put poured-in-place playground surfacing, which is made out of ground-up tire crumbs, which has PFAS in it. And we narrowly defeated it. So thanks to Priscilla getting up there and talking.
I got up, and after Kyla did a wonderful speech, I got up though and I played the grandmother role. I said, think about your grandchildren. Think about their tender bodies. Think about their rolling, playing on this equipment. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. What does that portend for their health? Anyway, we won, and so we kept PFAS out. So maybe there's some education that's going on. Let's hope so.
I hope so.
Okay, so those of you out there, we meet on the third Monday of every month, except January and February for obvious reasons. And we meet here at the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall. When the weather's great, we're here on the loggia. Look at this, wonderful, except for all that noise from the cars below. But we tolerate it, and we have wonderful food. And you are all invited to come 6 o'clock for supper, and a program following at 6:45 or 7. And we always have interesting programs. So let us know. Give us a call. Go to our website. Go to Facebook. Check us out. You're always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.